Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be concentrating on Act 1, Scene 1 of Othello by William Shakespeare. We'll be considering what happens in this scene, how directors have chosen to perform this scene, how the scene unfolds as a whole, and what ways Shakespeare uses language to accentuate what the key themes are. Our final job is to consider what our takeaways are of this scene when then placing it into the wider context of the play as a whole. So let's kick off. It begins with Roderigo, who's angry with his friend Iago because he feels he's not been supported because he wanted to marry the beautiful Desdemona. He finds out now that she's instead married to the Moorish general Othello, in secret though. Iago shares his hate for Othello to Roderigo, who has been promoting Cassio in a place that Iago feels he deserved. He wanted the position of lieutenant, and that went to Cassio instead. Iago makes it clear he wants revenge on Othello, and he's very clear with Roderigo that he will stop at nothing to get that. He encourages Roderigo to wake up Brabantio, that's Desdemona's father, and shares the news that they, Othello and Desdemona, have gotten married in secret. Brabantio looks for Desdemona in his home, and he's incredulous. He can't find her asleep, and he can't believe what he's heard. He wakes up his servants and demands that Othello and Desdemona are caught and brought to the Duke to discuss what has gone on. He cannot believe what he's heard. It's a very cruel thing to be told in such a way, woken from your sleep like this. It's also a ploy on the part of Roderigo and Iago to make Othello look terrible. So, how do directors choose to stage this scene? That's what happens. Well, Oliver Parker, in his 1995 film edition, chose to portray Iago's manipulation by placing Roderigo as being the only character who is visible when waking up Brabantio. Instead, Iago's first mode of Machiavellian tendencies is him hiding away from sight and pulling the strings for Roderigo sharing the bad news, so he is nowhere to be seen. In an Orson Welles version in 1952, where Orson starred, filmed, directed and produced, it would seem, the production, he sets a tragic tone in the opening sequence of the play by showing the funeral procession for Desdemona and Othello. It's heightening the inevitability for us as the audience. These characters will die, and now here you will learn how they die. So how does the drama unfold in this particular scene? Well, the very nature that we enter into the conversation between Iago and Roderigo midway, in the middle of the night, heightens how unhappy and in conflict they are. Roderigo is very much in conflict with Iago, to be honest. But he is the fool of this play, and he's not that successful in getting his point across. The question that's first raised to us as the audience is this play really principally about jealousy? It would seem so. Roderigo wanted Desdemona, and he's jealous that Othello has her, and Iago hates Othello for showing preferment to Cassio, and he hates Cassio equally, and he's jealous of Cassio for Othello preferring him. Both of these issues blur the boundaries between what is personal gain and public influence, and they hinge on deception, really, for this plot to propel. When Brabantio hears this, that his daughter has eloped, he wakes up others, making her deception such a public issue, and a political issue, we could say. We learn this marriage is the central conflict of the play from the start of this scene. The other question we have to consider is, does Shakespeare present the opening of this scene to force the audience to question the difference between what is reality and what appearances suggest? We could argue that Brabantio in this scene is more upset about his status and reputation than he actually is about what his daughter has chosen to do. It's shame on him, his fatherhood, but also his family's name. So the amazing privilege we get as critics and audience members within this play is that we get to consider how Shakespeare accentuates scenes but also the play as a whole through its language. If I were summarising Act 1, Scene 1 in terms of its pivotal linguistic features, it's the way that we meet our antagonist, Iago. He says outright, I am not what I am. He's openly duplicitous. He's got a double standard, and he mirrors the scene as a whole where every character in some way feels cheated. It seems dramatically ironic to us that Roderigo trusts a man who claims to be so self-serving. It affirms him very much so as our fool. As an audience, we wonder if we should trust what Iago says by the end of this scene. He says outright also, I serve him to serve my turn upon him. The repetition of the verb serve illustrates his Machiavellian attitudes once more, which prove he is a chief manipulator. Equally, it's the crude language we hear of an old black ram topping your white ewe. It's lacing misogyny here, and his crude animalistic metaphorical references to Othello as the black ram and Desdemona a white ewe having sex. The age difference between a ram and a ewe is hinted at here. It makes us feel uncomfortable to hear of such crude depictions of what we're sure to understand is our hero and his wife. Let's dig around a little more and consider the misogyny that's stated in this scene. This scene absolutely highlights the patriarchal fixations of the society that Shakespeare was writing for. Iago refers to Desdemona as merely a possession. He says to Brabantio, look to your house, your daughter and your bags. Yeah, in that order. Your house, then your daughter and then your stuff. Brabantio also seems quite neurotic and overbearing initially to us, and that seems to worsen as we see him across this whole act. He says, this accident is not unlike my dream. Interesting. It suggests he's really pored over these struggles before. He's had nightmares like this before. Another misogynistic moment for me is when Roderigo uses the image of the gross clasps of a lascivious Moor. It reflects again this quite pervasive stereotype during the Renaissance that the Moor, the other, the North African, was a sexual predator. It's very disturbing for us now in the 21st century, hearing these gross stereotypes being pushed and pulled into disgraceful contortions. But it's important to understand that if we were symbolising what Act 1, Scene 1 represents, it's definitely about us understanding that we can't trust the antagonist, and definitely that misogyny is rife, and that the patriarchal fixations of society will feature very heavily across this play. So, the takeaways from Act 1, Scene 1. The play opens with unhappy characters in conflict with each other. We meet our antagonist, Iago, and we see him manipulating before our very eyes. We understand by the end of this scene that deception is crucial to this plot, and unpacking the worries of each character that we see on stage in this scene. It's important to note that we only hear of Othello through others. It's as if we're meant to pose the question, are we meant to worry about the judgment of other characters, or acknowledge that no one is to be trusted at this stage? And finally, we can't avoid the patriarchal fixations that blur to misogyny in this scene, and we have to consider what the implications are for us as an audience now, in contrast for the audience that Shakespeare first wrote for. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?